that same standard deviation between June and now, you'll see that it is lower. So what that just tells you is that the volatility of the FX is at a lower level than it used to be. Now, should it still be volatile? No. And you remember, volatility is not just one way, it's both ways. So if the Naira is appreciating very fast, it is still volatile. So volatility is not just a case of Naira depreciating. The issue here is stability. And I think I've said it at one conference before, that what corporate treasurers are looking for is stability. So if the rate is 1,500, let it be 1,500 for 6 months. Okay? It can shift by fractions, but let it be there. Let the curve be that straight. Okay? Because then it allows you to plan. It allows you to take advantage of supply chain arrangements. You can sit down with your supplier and arrange certain discounts based on certain volumes that you are bringing in.
As you know,
there are a lot of things you can do because you can plan on the fact that in 3 months, 4 months, the exchange rate will be within a certain variable.
Into any banking hall.
But when it is 1,005 today,
you can too.
1,004 tomorrow, 1,006 the next day, 1,007 the next day, 1,006 the next day, you cannot plan. And that's the market volatility that we're talking about. So we're still facing some sense of FX volatility, but it is not at the level that it used to be. It is at a lower challenge. Now, the challenge for corporates is interest rate volatility. You heard when he came and said, some of you here in this room, you're already getting letters from your banks. Now, I want to ask treasurers here, how many times have you received letters from your banks in the last 3 months? Probably 4 times. 4 times. I have received, these days now it is normal. So when have they come, they've come again. First Bank is our sponsor, so I can't say anything. So the issue here is something that was not of a big problem before, interest rate, is now a big problem. The fact that you cannot predict your financing cost. One of the most predictable certain variables that you can predict when you're talking about your costing plan is your finance cost. You can just do a straight line. You know what it's going to be in the next 1 year, because you can look at variations of it to say, okay, even if it shifts, it can't shift more than 5%, 5 basis points. That's it. We're looking at variations in interest rate today. This year, interest rate started at somewhere around 18.5%. And today, banks are charging interest rate at close to 40%. Measure the volatility. Yes. So what was not a problem before has now become a problem. And you know what makes it so challenging? Typically, I was talking to Victory here, that typically in normal times, you don't deal with FX volatility and interest rate volatility at the same time. You deal with one is either, ask a typical treasurer, they will tell you that they will rather take interest rates volatility than FX rate volatility. They will rather, your costs, you can manage financing costs in a different way. When it comes down to it, it is a taxpayer, the tax authorities that take. There's a way that we are more accommodating of interest rates than FX rate. But you never find a situation where you are facing headwinds from interest and from FX at the same time. So it's like two trains coming at each other and you are in the middle. And they are heading towards you. Full speed ahead. So that's the challenge we're having. And I want to tell you this. If you're a treasurer in this place, and you are finding solutions, either those solutions are local or foreign or whatever, to make sure that those two trains heading at you have not yet crushed you, I think you need to give yourself a round of applause. You are the true MD of your organization. Last year, Iyabo, the executive director of Access Bank, told us here on this stage that each treasurer should look at himself and call himself the chief executive. Because you are. You are the one that is making sure that these two trains heading full speed ahead towards your organization, interest rate and FX rate, volatility, stronger on one hand, lower on the other hand, is heading towards you. And part of what we want to leave with is also to be able to say that organizations that don't have treasurers are only doing themselves much harm. Sorry, I've used more than 1 minute, but I needed to stress that.
It's absolutely necessary, sir. Thank you very much. Please, could you help me grab the mic? Thank you, sir. Okay, we still have a couple of questions. Two questions that I have seen that repeated themselves. Dr. Muda, is it possible for people to get the slides? Okay, yeah. So those that are asking if the slides... I didn't hear that, sir. Oh, okay, the slide is already with the ACTN. Oh, okay, then we have to figure out how to send it out to people. Now, that said, there's this question in the tiniest hand I've ever seen, and it says, what investment options can the SMEs or real sector consider to outpace inflation in Nigeria? I'll read it again. What investment options can SMEs or real sector consider to outpace inflation in Nigeria? Should I just read the remaining two questions, sir? So that you just, yes. All right. The next one here is, what are the solutions to help minimize the impact of the orthodox monetary policy regime? What are the solutions to help minimize the impact of the orthodox monetary policy regime? Did you get that, sir? Okay. What are the solutions to help minimize the impact of the orthodox monetary policy regime? And then finally, this one is actually long. So I'm just going to hand it over to you, sir. So because you won't, if I start reading all of this before you write it, so I think it's just best that let me read it out and then give it to you. Then you just answer. All right, for the purpose of understanding what this question is, it says, while you have addressed the monetary policies of the CBN in addressing inflation, you may have not considered the effect money supply has had on inflation. This seems to be what the CBN is grappling with, that has made the impact of its policies seem inefficient. Some data on M2, August 2024, new high of 107.1 trillion naira, a 63.3% year-on-year increase, and 0.75% increase. I can't see what is written there. The handwriting kind of got blurry. So then it says, the question now is, what do you advise the CBN to do to tame money supply? Given all these indices, what do you advise the CBN do to tame money supply? Yes, sir.
Well, the question on investment options, I'm not an investment advisor. Because these days it's difficult to advise investment. if I advise you and you put your money and the thing crashes, you will say that I was the one that advised. But what I can say is that as much as possible, we should minimize exposures to some of these areas that the president just alluded to. Debt financing is one of them. If you expose yourself too much to debt financing at the current level of interest rates, it will create a very big risk for the business, because ability to service the current level of interest rate. So we need to look at the way we finance the business, irrespective of the sector. Secondly, as an SME, the less you get exposed to importation or things that are directly impacted by foreign exchange, the better. The more we're able to localize transactions, the more we're able to source things inward. Because the two biggest issues, just as the president talked about moving train, is FX and interest rates. So if you don't want to be crushed, as you have demonstrated, don't stand between or near those things, if it is possible. So that is what I will advise. We look more inward as an SME and look at what you can do, increasing local content. I think that's the best I can say in terms of investment opportunities. And of course, investment depends on your skill, your experience. You can't just go and do any investment. You must have some knowledge about it. But these fundamentals is something that must guide you. A solution to minimize the impact of orthodox monetary policy. Well, it's also the same thing. Because the orthodox monetary policy is creating major volatility and pressure from foreign exchange side and from interest rate side. So to the extent that the CBN remains largely fixated on this orthodox monetary policy, then again we need to minimize the exposure to foreign exchange and to interest. If there are other ways you can finance your business, fine. You can get equity investment, fine. I think for me, those are the two key issues. And of course, on the advocacy front, it's for us to advise the CBN to do a lot more with respect to development finance. This is a developing economy that requires state intervention in financing. You cannot throw everybody to the commercial banks to go and raising money. So there has to be state intervention in a way that small businesses and many other businesses can, particularly those in the real sector, those in construction, those in real estate, those are critical sectors that require state intervention in terms of financing. So that is purely an advocacy issue. Somebody talk about money supply. Yes, you can argue that the CBN is mopping up liquidity because of money supply. But the point is that where is the liquidity coming from? Is the liquidity coming from the entrepreneurs that are struggling, or is coming from the government? So if it is not coming from the entrepreneurs cannot be paying the price for the high liquidity. You are penalizing them. The president just told us that interest rate is getting to 40%. So who is causing the liquidity and who is paying the price for the liquidity? It's businesses. So if there is a way at the level of the government for them to minimize, I just told you about fiscal deficit, to identify the sources of this liquidity and try to minimize it. In my presentation, I spoke to you about domestic credit as a percentage of GDP. You can see how low it is. The financial system is not supporting the private sector or the real economy enough. From that data, they can do more. So this liquidity is definitely not coming from the private sector. So if the tap is flowing, you should go and close the tap from wherever it is coming from. And that tap is also even affecting FX. Each time they share the FAC allocation, you see the impact on the FX market. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done with respect to the fiscal operations of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So I'd like to, as we wrap up this question and answer session, I'd like to hand the mic over to Mr. Zeal Akaraiwe, President Emeritus, ACTN Governing Council, to say one or two things about the subject matter. Thank you. Here, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. So just, we're all corporate treasurers, so I just want to create an avenue to give you a perspective that I'm hoping you all go back and do some research. So I'm not answering any question, but I'm giving you a perspective that's very important. And there are three areas I want to quickly talk about. The first is on the money supply. There's something I shared with the President, Yinka, a few weeks ago. I put it on social media, what I call the 10 by 10 by 10 coincidence. So roughly 10 years ago, or rather, should I say over about 10 years, money supply has grown 10 times, right? Prices have gone up 10 times. And the exchange rate is almost exactly 10 times what it was then. And I said, on these three fronts, is it a coincidence? No, it's not exactly 10 years. You have to go back to maybe 2010. 2010, M2 was 10 trillion. Today, it's 100 trillion. 2014, exchange rate was 160. Today, it is 160 times 10, roughly. And Yinka is here. 10 years ago, Toyota Corolla was 5 million naira. Today, it is 52 million naira. Now, is it a coincidence that money supply, exchange rate, pricing has gone up almost by exactly the same multiple over almost exactly the same time? I don't think it's a coincidence. Why did it go up and all that? We're treasurers, we can go and research that later. I won't go into that. Second issue I want to talk about, which is also very important regarding timing. In any industry, if you have worked for 10 years, you're an expert doing the same thing. In whether engineering, whether finance, treasury, teaching. 10 years was, I remember as a child, 10 years was almost the benchmark to be senior management and executive management. But I don't know about the ACTN, so I will not throw us under the bus, but I will tell you in FMDA, which is the banking equivalent of ACTN, 90% of treasury staff in the banks today have less than 10 years experience. Why is 10 again very important? 10 years ago, 2014, a series of things happened. Number one, the central bank governor changed and we got Godwin Emefiele 10 years ago. Shortly after that, the government changed and then president, everything changed. 6 months after, shortly after that, let's say 6 months, oil prices started to crash. The following year, the country went into recession. What does this mean? Any treasurer you have that has 10 years experience and below does not know, has not worked, has not been part of a normal functioning market. From 2015, if you've been there, our market was not normal. All sorts of things were done to hold the exchange rate because of the recession, to streamline foreign exchange flows, the DFIs we were talking about, the interventions. I mean, if you think about it, 2010, 2011, total money supply in the country, M2, was 10 trillion. Between 2018 and, say, 2021, total intervention funds injected into the economy was at least 30 trillion. At least. So to give you an idea, the whole country was surviving on 10 trillion. Within a space of 3 years, we injected 3 times more. So when we talk about what's going on now, and I like what Dr. Muda said, where is it coming from? Who should pay for it? I don't want to use the word, but we've enjoyed certain things over a long period. Now it's time to pay back the entire economy. Now, when I say we, I'm not talking of individuals. We know a few people have enjoyed certain things. I mean, how much was fuel 10 years ago? How much is it today? How much was diesel 10 years ago? How much is it today? So these are very important things that we need to go back and reflect on, because it's important that if you've been in any market in Nigeria for 10 years and below, with all due respect, we don't know what normal is. Now, that brings me to the last point, which I know is a question I've been asked a lot of times, and I suspect it will come up at some point. You know, the whole concept in the foreign exchange market about willing buyer, willing seller. I've not met more than 3 people that understand what it means. But if you ask, everybody will tell you what it means. Everybody's impression is that as long as I have an asset and I'm willing to sell that asset at a price, as long as there's another counterparty willing to buy that asset at my price, he's a willing buyer and I'm a willing seller, correct? No, that's not what it means. That's what common sense says it is. That's what it means in a free market. In our market is not a free market. We have an exchange-controlled market. So by definition, by law, the market is defined. No, let me start the other way around. The black market is what? The unofficial market is where somebody is selling you dollars without a license, and you are buying dollars without documentation. Isn't it? That's the black market. Yeah. Okay, so do you think the willing buyer, willing seller applies to the official market in the same definition as the black market? It can't. What is the official market? The official market is where 2 counterparties buy or sell foreign exchange on the condition, and this is what's written in law, it's in the April 2017 circular of the central bank. One of those 2 counterparties must be an authorized dealer. So when the law or the regulator talks about willing buyer, willing seller in the market means one counterparty at least is an authorized dealer. At least. 2 can be, that's interbank, but at least 1. So when you are a seller and you are selling in the market, you are selling to an authorized dealer. You are a willing seller. The authorized dealer has to be a willing buyer at that price. The reason this exists, and part of the problem we're having in the foreign exchange market today, is that the willing buyer is not a willing buyer when it's a bank. He has become, over 10 years of issues in the market, he has become a willing agent, not a willing buyer. So when you tell your bank, I want to sell money, your bank is not willing to buy, but your bank is willing to help you find somebody that is willing to buy. And when that happens, your authorized dealer becomes an authorized broker. When that happens, it means the transmission of monetary policy into price action is lost. It's lost. So whatever tightening the central bank does that should impact the consumer, it breaks down in the market. And so interest rates, as high as they are doing what they should do. Net flows I have the charts for this year. Net flows through our economy are massively positive. The demand for FX right now is roughly 60-70% the supply. Supply for foreign exchange in the market today far, not a little, far outstrips demand. But guess what? The transmission of that demand-supply imbalance into price breaks down because willing buyer, willing seller is not being operated. You're doing willing buyer, willing seller, or willing buyer, and willing broker, who is then transmitting your price, not monetary policy. So for example, the way the market would work is if you wanted to sell dollars in the market today, because Naira is tight and expensive, your bank, in buying the dollars from you, has to borrow the Naira, right? Part of the reason the long position of banks was removed was if your bank buys your dollars and cannot sleep on it, he's forced to price in the risk of redistributing the dollars quickly within the same day. So what that naturally does is that the buyer will drop his price because he has to account for the expensive Naira and the fact that he has to dispose of the dollars quickly. So ordinarily, the currency should be appreciating. But we don't have willing buyers, we have willing brokers. So when you bring your money to the banks, and I'm sure all of you have experienced it, the bank will ask you, what rate do you want? And then tell you, hold on, I'll get back to you. Then the bank goes and looks for people that are desperate. So the price of the currency today does not reflect the value of the naira. It reflects the price at which the most desperate people are willing to pay for it. So the companies that are not very desperate, you know what they're doing? They're not doing anything. I know companies that will tell you, I'm earning 25, 26% of my naira. Let it stay there. I'm not buying FX at this rate. The people buying the FX, so what we are doing to ourselves is counterintuitive, but that's just, like I said, it's just a perspective I'm giving you to go back. You can do your research, you can speak to your banks. Until that anomaly is corrected in the market, you're going to find the very unusual situation. The foreign investors, if you see the data, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, foreign investors have brought about 2 billion into the market because they know this price is not correct, right? Well, we are the ones that don't know it. So you're still hearing there's dollar scarcity. This time last year, I know how many calls I would get for one person looking to buy $500,000. And if you wanted to buy, even PTA, who remembers last year, you call, do you know somebody in this bank? Do you know somebody? But now, people are buying and selling. You don't get those calls anymore. The liquidity situation has improved massively. If you look at the reserves have grown almost $1 billion every month in the last 3 or 4 months. It's not fictitious. It is reflecting the fact that demand has dropped and supply has increased. So unless we correct this anomaly in the market, you're going to have the very weird situation where supply outstrips demand, but price is going up. Naira is tight, but price is going up. And what that takes us into the final thing I'll say, that we're in the world of behavioral economics. The issue is people do not believe these things. And so over the next 2 weeks or so, you're going to see a significant campaign from the CBN putting out data, trying their best to investor confidence and consumer confidence. That this is the data, this is the reality. There is more than enough money to go around. There is no need to be desperate. And we need to fix the anomaly within the market infrastructure itself. So let me put that out there so that while we're debating it, we can have that perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that insight of plaque for Dr. Muda Yusuf. So, sir, please come up. Can I please have the president again? I crave your indulgence, sir. I seem to be giving you a lot of assignments today. Also, Mrs. Victory Olumiwa, please come up. Okay. So immediately after the presentation of plaque, please, I would like to have all members of the Governing Council up here for a picture as well. Media, please can we, thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Governing Council of the ACTN, we're glad to present this plaque to you, Dr. Yusuf, for your support and the wonderful presentation that you gave to us today. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you.
Members of the Governing Council, please. Let's come up for a further session. Thank you very much, sirs and Maz. You may please have your seat. Treasury 360. See, these are my people.